So, that looking back, there's so many backgrounds, right, to choose from. But when I'm in sort of this wrestling mindset and starting of the story and growing up, I think I go to the place where I was when I was first deciding to wrestle, and it's hard to tell my story without making it sort of the tail end of my parents' story, which was amazing. But they were. Um, Immigrants and had gotten asylum through Canada and were I was the first American born, let's say, here. And my mother had just passed, so I was 10, and she passed young. And I was, for the first time, sort of trying to answer these bigger questions on, if I was going to die young, which I was pretty sure I was going to as well as a kid reaction, I think, to a parent passing. What did I want to do with my life before that happened? And the question and answer that I got is I was gonna know myself. I was gonna find every boundary, find my limits mentally and emotionally, because that's what you're given, and the only thing you're given when you're born, and to not have explored that before you go, for that 10, 11-year old's mind, I was just like, well, that's the one thing I can do. And how I was going to do that, right? How a kid figures it out. I soon learned that I learned the most about who I was when I was a little bit scared or challenged, right? When I sat and wrote in my journal, what did I learn? It was normally when I was asked to do something that I didn't know if I could do. So in junior high, my eighth grade year, when a runner came around to our PE class and said, "Hey, there's wrestling tryouts today." My first reaction was like, "Oh dear, who'd want to do that?" I was very scared, like, ah. And a second went by, and then I'm like, "Oh, darn it. Now that means I got to go." And but it was that pact that I had made with myself so very early on, to let's go find out where my limits are. So I went to that wrestling practice, and within the first practice itself, right, found a boundary. Uh, Shook hands at the very end of class, ready, wrestle, little live, and I immediately just froze up. Right, too much adrenaline. My family had no athletes ever in it before, and something about that fight, right, just made me sort of freeze up, adrenaline jolt, and fall over, really. And I went home that night and told my father, and he was like, "Oh, thank goodness," right? Not sure I wanted you to wrestle anyway. And I'm like, "Oh no, Dad, don't you see what this means? Now I have to go back." And until he passed, he remembered me using the word firstborn and just thought it was so funny. But I was like, now I have to go back because I can't just fall over if someone attacks my firstborn someday. So that was my first ever wrestling goal, right? I was going to go back, at least until I learned how to fight back in case someone ever attacked my firstborn. And thankfully, that kept me involved in wrestling long enough to fall in love with it for, I think, better reasons. And that soon happened after that. Well, and if I can, let me launch right into the real reason, the real love of the sport, because it's exactly that. When I kept going back into wrestling, what I discovered, and perhaps anything that someone is really passionate about can open this window into themselves. But what I found was that it pushed you so far, mentally and physically, that it actually opened up this window directly into your soul, right into the heart of who you are and your character. And you got to see it. And there were several times in those high school practices where I would make, the best decisions, right? I'd quit a little, I'd make an excuse, I'd blame someone, right? But the way I came to see it is that you don't actually know what you do in a situation until you're there. And I use the example of a car accident on a highway, right? We all want to believe that we'd be the person in that car accident on the highway that would keep our level head. We'd pull people to safety. We'd remember to put the car on the side of the road, right? None of us want to say that we're the ones that are going to scream our heads off when we see blood and cause a second accident, right? Like, but you don't know, right? You don't know until you're there, right? And you can hope that your challenges and how you've overcome them and who you built, would react a certain way. And that's exactly what I got with wrestling. I got to go into that car accident every day. And the only price of admission is to be honest and accountable for what I saw and how I acted. And if there was something that wasn't quite, where I wanted to be, I admitted it to myself and I got to go back the next day and enter that same accident and start again, right? And change what I wanted to change. And the neatest thing about that was me realizing that you don't have to be who you were born. Exactly. You could be you and you could modify and build character. You can build the reaches of your foundation, which is sort of the purpose of this whole growing up thing, right? Like build as big a foundation so you can go as high or as far as you want so others can lean on you, right? So like wrestling was getting to go in there and then modify and build and know my edges such that yeah I know where my edges are. Like people can rely on me. Right, I know where I'm gonna break or not break, and if I'm gonna break I know I'm not gonna waste time and energy making excuses about it, right? And it just sort of trained that kind of those patterns that I wanted to see in myself and that I want to see in my kids. And that's why I mean wrestling was just an amazing vehicle for that because it just cuts out all of the fluff, all of the faking. There's nothing that you fake about that, it's only you out there in spandex nonetheless. And it's this, universal language. Like you can just see it, when you quit, when they quit, and you get the chance to go back out there when it's still just, a sport, right? But it's really just that jungle play before we go out in the real world. And that's what we're providing to our kids as they grow up through high school and college. Like, I just can't imagine a better venue for folks to be working on that kind of building and rebuilding. And if too soon we take that away from our young people, then the pressure to just act as if you are fully formed, act as if you have all of the answers, right? And now we have a whole group of folks that are just hoping that they never really get called out because they didn't get to build and test and get broken down and rebuild their foundation. That is why sport is important in those years, right? Not because any of the medals matter at all, but because all of our young people got to do that in a safe yet intense environment where they can't make excuses to themselves or anyone else, because someday we really need them not to make excuses out in the world when it matters. Right? And for so long that hasn't been open, right, to half the population, or not as readily, or they had to choose between their academic dreams and that chance to sort of build and rebuild in that primitive but important way, right? And so that's why, right, invest now, open these doors to these women that are excelling academically but should have the opportunity to build and rebuild this character, right, through this trial and error before they go out in the real world and really build their foundation. If you step back and look at systems, right, and the kinds of doors and contexts that we want to have available for the young people, right, that are going to be growing and running, right, everything. The the idea that the folks already on the cusp and pushing boundaries, right? They're already understanding that they're going to need to make sacrifices. They're going to be curious. They're going to push themselves. They're going to, try and fail, but and then learn how to do that calculus AP class and get themselves into. So they're already showing that they have that ability to go beyond and grow and add, I think, to the foundation that they had. And I can tell you the ability to be comfortable in your discomfort, right? To keep pushing, while you're still young and growing into the boundaries that you don't yet know that you have. That doesn't always come from the same type of pattern of success, right? The academic level will get someone very, very good and focused on one or two things, but we are whole people and whole human beings, and we have a body and we have balance and we have, and you have emotional breaking points, right? That all the whole package is supposed to be developing at the same time. And I've just observed it's not just through sport, it's in my profession, it's through just normal neighborhood meetings that there's a critical point in someone's development where they develop their fixed action pattern reaction to discomfort, right? And once someone starts shying away from something that makes them uncomfortable, from being pushed, from being challenged, that person is going to start running, and they're going to be running for their whole lives. And their world from that point on starts to get smaller, right? Their options are smaller. Their foundation is smaller because there's just places they won't go, right? Or too many house of cards being built because to go here, they have to admit that they really did quit or they were scared of that last thing. And they passed on that next project. They didn't know if they could do it, but now they know it's an option to always just pass on the project. Somebody else will, and it's weird. I'm trying to talk generally because it's so applicable, right? To just a decision of when you start shying away from pain. And I know, Mother Nature's super smart. There's pain lets you know that your leg's about to fall off. Maybe you should attend to it. But she's a blunt instrument as well, right? All pain is not bad. And you have to learn to be able to sit with your pain and your discomfort and process it, right? And once you know you can and you can push through and come out the underside, then you're invincible, right? That's resilience, right? You can go, you can get wounded, but you can get to the other side. And as a parent, isn't that really our goal, right? When you're raising folks in society, teach them how to push through, right? And work with their discomfort and be who they are despite that pain and that confidence to make it through the other side. One of the biggest challenges of being a parent and, one of the most um, wealthy and blessed countries in the world, right? Is how do we give that practice arena, right, to these young men and women that are learning, a very instinctually contradictory thing, like, hey, I can lean into my own pain. I can welcome this challenge because it's crafting me and teaching me how and who I want to be later, right? That's why you combine the top academic institutions with activities and methods that these young people can keep placing themselves while they're not in threat of death, right? But in these scenarios that truly make them work through and process discomfort because it builds their capacity, right? As human beings, because we're about to, parents won't be there forever. We're going to step aside, not be there in the world, and the world is coming no matter what we do, right? And we don't even know what kind of world that's going to be, right, for them post college. So don't we want them just to get all around strong, flexible, adaptable, resilient, right? and wrestling, really, the catch-all sport, right? You don't even need two arms, two legs to wrestle. You don't need to be tall. You don't have to have a certain body type. You just need to, be willing to work hard, right? And come back the next day. Like, how do you not make that an option at our top level colleges and the most important time in these young people's development? Yeah, I mean, 'cause I had that similar recognition like you just did for your daughter of what a gift this kind of experience is for all of these young ladies and men, because it's that such a unique gift, right? They will rely on these moments, these hard moments where it's just them in that place with that decision ahead of themselves, and knowing that they were able to do it and attack it like a lion, whether or not they won or not, that they will carry. They won't even know which moment it is. And hopefully it's two or three. But it's like a little buoy that they just get to put right inside their heart, and they get to take it into all of the next tough situations that they have, and it'll be, it's surreal, it's a subconscious, it's a flash in their mind, but they'll get taken back and just know, like, well, I could do that, I can do this. It's that little bit that's going to get them through. And I can say in the law, right, there's a lot of those moments where you realize that it really comes down to you, right? You're helping this client, and it's really them that you're representing. But if you don't know the right things, if you didn't get the right answers, if you didn't like, you actually really matter. And I remember it hitting me that it just mattered so much more than even my Olympic match, because that only really mattered to me and the few people that cared about that sport, right? But now this is a family whose life might be forever changed, be without a parent, or might get sent back somewhere and be persecuted. I'm like, oh, that's what I've been doing all that for, right? Like, and I can just take a breath and center, and I'm not the liability, right? I know where my edges are, I know where my center is, and I can just do what the job needs right now for that mom, right? And that's an incredible gift, right? And for me, I even always added it with a tiny bit of humor, because humor sort of centers me. It gives you perspective, right? Because if you get too lost, you're not performing well either. But I'd always, last thing before I got up from the council table, I'd say, well, at least I'm not doing it in spandex anymore. And that give myself a little chuckle, like, okay, but at least I get to wear a suit. Um, yeah, and I think the other time that it came back, you and I, Lori, are connected to this through the Stanford program. But when I was called about joining the Keep Stanford Wrestling movement, I was in that place where, I was sort of paying forward a lot of the gifts that I have received, and say I'm now helping this new community through my work, and I'm just like, well, that's one more asylum case I can't do if I'm joining this movement to save a sport, which I owe a lot to, but I'm paying it back here, right? That's in a way that I think that I might be better suited for. And the full stop happened when I recalled those little nuggets, those gifts, and I remember pulling back and holding those, and those helping me when I was down at the border, at the detention facility, or at the Tijuana border. And I could just feel like I was at the edge of everything, really emotionally, physically, and I just know that that was only possible because enough, people and institutions cared enough to allow me to have built that foundation in high school and college. right? Without that, there's just no way I could have taken that much lean, without fear of toppling or hurting someone more by me toppling. Like I could stand there strong because institutions, folks, and supporters allowed me to build that through high school and college. So once that hit, I'm just like, well, who's gonna replace me here? I'm like, where are the reinforcements coming from? Well, they're gonna come from these top level institutions that do care enough to provide this opportunity. And so, heck yeah, I'm going to come back and help and make sure at least Stanford keeps those training grounds open because that's where our replacements are coming from, right? Don't shut that door. We need those folks to be building for tomorrow.